the Sports Coaching Podcast with Sam Holmshaw.
Okay, welcome back to the Sports Coaching Podcast with me, Sam Beth. As always, we hope everyone is keeping well in this strange and difficult time that seems to be never ending at the minute. But back with another podcast today, and I am absolutely delighted to welcome Beth Curzon. Beth, hope I pronounced the surname correctly after we just had a brief chat off air. But how are you? How are you doing?
Yeah, I'm good, thank you. I hope you're well.
Yeah, not too bad. I guess the question I always ask everyone is, how's this COVID period been for you? Managed to get through it okay?
Yeah, it's a tough one. I've been trying to keep busy, keep healthy. I've just kind of been doing lots of workouts at home, been going on runs and walks and things like that. So fingers crossed everything will get back to normal soon, because I'm definitely missing it.
Yeah, 100%. So, Beth, delighted to have you. First footballer we've actually had on the podcast. We normally have coaches, so that's a fantastic professional footballer, I should say. I'm gonna try and pronounce it, Beth. I know we've just had a chat off there, but FC Pirin Blagoevgrad. I think I've completely messed that up, so I'll let
it's
you.
It's not far off. Pirin Blagoevgrad. It's not far off.
Pirin Blagoevgrad. There we go. Finally got there. So yeah, I mean, fantastic to have you on. It's great to talk to you and connect. So.
Thank you.
What we normally do at this podcast is we normally would ask the guests about this coaching background, but I think obviously appropriate for you, ask you about your playing background. So if you don't mind, I suppose from the beginning, just give us an overview of your journey and what's led you to where you are today.
Sure. So I grew up when I was little, always had a football in my hand, little football. My dad played for the Notts County youth team, Baseford United, Eastwood, that kind of thing. My mum grew up with 6 brothers, so she was very good at football as well. And she played with all them. So I've always been playing football and played in the garden with my mum and stuff like that.
So when I was about 6 or 7, I began playing football on the field and the playground with the school, with all the boys in my classes and things. And it was my caretaker at the time of the school also championed girls football. And he said to me, look, you're really good. You need to join a team outside of school, and I know there's not many around for girls, so why don't you join the boys team that with the boys that you play with at school? And so that's what I did, and I played with them until I was about 11.
And then I joined a Sunday team with the girls, so I played Saturday, Sunday, and for the school. Carried on that way for a while until I had to leave because that was the FA rules. Joined, I think, another West Bridgeford side, that kind of thing, went through Sherwood, Netherfield. When I was 16, then transitioned from, under 16s we went straight to women's football. And that was obviously a big change. And then I think in 2018 was when I joined Notts County, having played for Eastwood Town. Played them for 2 years, joined Burton Albion, and then within a couple of months I was off playing for Pirin in Bulgaria. So that's kind of the story. It's quite the last year or so I've had 3 clubs. So I just signed for Burton, and I got the call within 4 days. I was like, yeah, I'm off. Packed my life in a suitcase. It was a tough one, but exciting nonetheless.
Fantastic. So I suppose, and without getting into today's topic, we're going to save it for later, but what was it like sort of growing up and playing in an all boys team? I'd be very intrigued, what that experience was like for you.
To be honest, I didn't know any different. I'd done it for so long, and I'd done it on the playground, that I actually didn't see much of a difference, to be honest, until I left the boys' team I started to be treated differently actually in football. And I thought, hang on a minute. I mean, I got a few comments and stuff, actually, not from the boys, but from the dads. Not on my team, but we'd play a bit of a rough side. And I remember one time really vividly, we were 2-0 up, playing really well. It was freezing, and this one kid, I think it was like a centre mid, was on me all game. I think I was about 11 at this point. It's just before I left, and his dad was like, "She's a girl, like you can't let her beat you." And he was like, "Take her out," and he absolutely both feet, took me out. I scraped all my legs. I was trying not to cry. Just past the halfway line, and then I went and scored from the free kick. So I thought, that teaches you, doesn't it? So it was. I mean, I have some really good memories growing up, and I used to score a lot in the training sessions and stuff. So I was really close with them, and I'm actually good friends still with a lot of the boys that play, or used to play. So overall, it was a really good experience for me, and it was different to the girls' team I played for. But I really enjoyed my time there.
Yeah, fascinating. Thanks for sharing. And I guess the question I've got to ask you is, what's it like becoming a professional? I believe that kind of happened to you within the last year. Is that right?
Yeah. So literally in October in 2020, I basically got contacted by an agent who I'm now with that agency. I'm with a different agent, and I speak to the guy that helped me get out there as well. And he said, I'm aware of like you as a player, footage wise and stuff I've seen, but are you interested in this opportunity in Europe? And I was like, well, of course, because I'm not playing here at the moment, with COVID and stuff as well. And I was like, sure thing. Within a couple of days, I was on the phone to the manager. He'd seen my footage, was like, you're great. He's a British manager, which helped a lot with language. And it was literally, I remember on Thursday we had a call, and he said, can you come out by the weekend? And I said, I don't think I can actually. I can't put my life up that fast. I've got a car and everything. And then, so I said, well, Monday then. And I flew out on the Monday. So it was a bit of a whirlwind, really. Literally happened over a course of a week or so. So yeah, that's the story of how I became a professional player, which is very exciting.
Fantastic. And I suppose, sort of moving out to Bulgaria, I mean, what was that like, especially in a COVID world? I mean, it must have been fascinating.
It was really intimidating, to be honest. The first thing I noticed when I got on the plane was everyone was Bulgarian, and I didn't realise how much of they love coming to England. Yeah. So I think I was the only British person on the flight, to be honest. So I couldn't really converse with anybody. Obviously all wearing masks and things, so it's the first time I've travelled during COVID, so it was quite daunting. Landed, and then it was crazy to realise they had no restrictions at all in place when I landed, and I was like, what is going on? They had a huge lockdown in March, and it worked quite well until it began growing again later in the year. But yeah, I went, got there, I think, stayed the night because I got there quite late. Next morning, was up in the clubhouse, spoke for about 5 hours with the coach about like the policies, the club procedures, kind of the ethics and all that kind of thing. And then that evening I did a strength and conditioning, and then video analysis, and joined in with them all. And that was the taster. And I thought, oh my goodness. Next day I was training already. But I mean, it was, when people think of Bulgaria, you think of Varna and the nice beach and stuff like this. It's right by Macedonia, Blagoevgrad is. So it was a very, very classically Bulgarian town. Barely anyone spoke English, so I had to pick it up quite quickly, and it's a very tough language. Yeah. But a couple of the girls were quite fluent, which was really nice, and they did really try. And nice people, so I actually really enjoyed it there.
Yeah, fantastic.
Yeah, it was really good.
I mean, and it always interests me as well when English players go abroad. I mean, how do you mentioned there, I suppose a few spoke English, but that language barrier, how do you sort of just communicate and get in and feel comfortable enough to like actually play with those players? I mean, is it just the language of football, or how does that work?
I did struggle with that, to be honest. Initially, it took me a good few weeks to properly settle in, to be honest. I wasn't playing my best, and I can now understand what players mean. Fan side of football and player side are two very different things. I mean, I support Notts. I love Notts County. And I see fans on Twitter giving grief to some players that have just come in or flown in from France and things, and I think it's not all fun and games. Language is different, city's different, everything's different. So one thing that was good was our goalkeeper is Scottish, and I'm best friends with her now, and she was my roommate, so that was like a lifesaver as well, because she'd already been there a few months. So had some relationships with the players. Yeah. And the coach was British, so he would coach in English, and one of the girls that was fluent in English would then translate, so it took twice as long to do everything. But I don't know, I think it got in my head, even doing the drills, I would get confused.
Mm.
And I thought, and it's just been told to me in English, but I thought there was such, and I
Yeah.
was trying to learn the language, and other people I'm new, so they're trying to have a bit of, banter and stuff.
Yeah.
But I picked up the basics, but the style of play is notably very different as well.
Yeah.
They're very institutionalized in that it's kind of our way or no way kind of. It's the long ball. They like that. Even the men's side like that. And Warren Feeney actually is the men's manager, and he's British, so he was trying to teach them British way of playing too, just like our manager was. So yeah, it was tough. Sometimes I play the ball through expecting a player to be there, and they just weren't. And I thought, oh, I look awful here.
Yeah.
But it was quite fast paced. We had a few Bulgarian internationals, like national players as well. So it was a good side.
So a culture basically of you have to fit in playing this way or see you later. Then is that what it was?
It was, yeah. I mean, that's when I first landed. I thought the coach warned me, and he said, "Look, I've been here for a few months now, and I'm trying to change the mindset. They're not too keen on that." But it started to work, and he very much wanted. He loved Liverpool, and he liked the quick passing, 1-2s, quick movement, outside feet, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Which is my kind of football. But when there's two sides of the spectrum going on, I've got to fit in somewhere in between. Eventually, it was absolutely fine. I made my debut, and I was really happy. I nearly scored and assisted 2 in like 4 minutes. Wow. So it was working, whatever was happening, but it was tough to settle in after for a few weeks. Yeah,
I imagine. Well, I have to say I'm absolutely fascinated. Cultures within clubs always fascinates me anyway as a coach. So really interesting. And yeah, I mean, my final question, I suppose, if that really fascinates me, that the coach was, talking in English. Well, I suppose you always imagined that they would try and pick up the language, but then again, like you say, Bulgarian, what a difficult language. I can't even imagine that. So was it football words, or was it like in detailed English, and those Bulgarian players had to just try and figure out, from the translation? Or very difficult.
To be honest, he spoke quite detailed English, to be honest, because half the time I was like, but so a girl called Ekaterina was very fluent. She had a sister that lives in London that speaks fluent English. She probably became one of my closest Bulgarian friends. So she really could translate most things. There was a few things she was like, "What are you saying?" And sometimes he'd kind of try and lower it. I mean, the problem did come eventually. The British manager was released when I was there. So then came the problem of, we did then get an assistant and manager take over. There's still the managers there, but they were completely Bulgarian. So then obviously me and my roommate were like, oh, okay, now we're on the other end of this. So we'll see how this goes. And that was a big change too, actually. But at that point, I knew each other. I knew people well enough, so they were trying to help me out as well. But that was tough. Yeah.
Oh, I've got to say, fascinating, and thank you so much for sharing your journey and giving us an insight. Really interesting from my perspective. So thank you very much. So yeah, I guess that leads us on very nicely to today's topic then. So we decided today's topic was going to be around players' experiences on youth development and an insight on if coach gender makes a difference within the women's game. Now, 2 topics for me within the women's game at the minute, I've always found fascinating. I find it really interesting that maybe that's something that's actually quite unique to women's football, particularly at this moment in time. So Beth, I'm really looking forward to hearing your experiences here from your insight as a player. So if we immediately move on to the first segment then. So experiences of youth development. So I know I briefly asked you into introduction there, but growing up playing in a boys team, I suppose, how is that, for you? I suppose like that was just the norm. It wasn't too much difference for you. But did that present any challenges? I know we briefly spoke about the player's dad who was telling that, but what other challenges kind of came from that? I'd be really interested to hear.
So I never had too much trouble with playing alongside the boys that I did. I was always really good friends with them, always growing up with them, and played for the team. My mum was friends with their mums, that kind of thing. So I never really got any grief from within my own team, which was really good, really, because I can't say the same for some other girls that grew up playing in boys' teams that I know.
I know it never felt out of place or anything like that. The only time I think I really did was when I first joined initially, which is quite common. You hear a lot of girls that played in boys' teams, was the whole passing. I didn't get passed to as much, and I thought, what is going on? Because you don't do this when I'm on the playground. And then they kind of sort of, warming up to the idea that I was there, and I was part of their team and stuff, and I could help them. And then I think the second time was an end of season award ceremony. They did from like under sixes to seniors, men's on the same night, and I was literally the only girl and about 300 men, boys and men, and that was really intimidating. And I suddenly thought that it's not the norm. Like, it's always been the norm to me. I've never felt any different. And then I stood there, in my little skirt and holding my little trophy, and I thought, oh my goodness. But I still have fond memories of that night and stuff. But and I was always treated differently when I said I played for boys team and stuff. Lots of people would be like, oh, it's a shock, because it wasn't a common thing. I think I came across one other girl in a team that I played against. So within my team was fine, but I did get a few comments here and there. But I brushed them off quite well when I was younger. But I didn't have any horrendous experiences and things, which was actually nice, because some people have completely the opposite, and it's got worse as I got older. I noticed it's as soon as I left boys football that things took a turn. Not while I was playing with them, which is very interesting actually.
Yeah, I mean, it certainly is, because I can remember managing junior football teams when I was like 18, 19, managed the under 10s, under 11s, and we actually had a girl play for us, and I absolutely loved it. She was such a great kid, and she was a fantastic player. And her dad always used to say to me, the reason that she plays in a boys team, because there's just not the opportunities for girls, or at that particular time, about 5 or 6 years ago. So that was fantastic for me. I thought it was brilliant, and I always welcomed it. But when we come across junior teams, you'd naturally get the opposition players. Obviously, they're only young lads, so they were like, oh, it's a girl, and all this sort of stuff. But what always really shocked me was the parents. Oh, it's a girl. And I'd never heard anything as bad as what you were saying about, wow, she's a girl. But, you'd hear stuff and you just think, that's just not right.
Yeah.
I know it's the boys' game, but is football not all about, being inclusive and all that sort of stuff? And to me, that was just, I suppose for me, that's when I began to really understand the sort of difficulties of what it's like, with being a female playing football. There's a lot of challenges that come through that. So for me, that always just completely shocked me.
It's baffling, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, and I don't know. I mean, I suppose when you were growing up, I suppose it's probably different to what it is now, but were there not all girls teams back then? Was it just the opportunity to play in the boys team?
I think after about a year, I joined a girls team on a Sunday. But for the time being, when I first joined boys, I was just playing for boys only. But yeah, I mean, and then when I joined a girls team, it was, like you mentioned, it was different, because not because they were boys, but because they had more opportunity and more exposure to the game. So I didn't benefit from it because they were boys. I benefited because they had been exposed to football from birth and the girls hadn't. So some of the girls I played with were very good, but they'd been playing for 6 months. So I had developed from the boys game in that respect, because I'd been playing for longer, and that was the difference. I think that's what people don't pick up as much. It's difference in exposure and opportunity, not because they're boys, and especially at that age, I didn't stand out as a girl physically, or I wasn't any worse, or I couldn't do a skill because I was a girl. It was just that they had been exposed more to the game and had played 5 years instead of 3 months. So that was the difference. Yeah,
I mean that is fascinating, because that was the biggest thing I noticed, sort of stepping into women's football. And I was at the bottom of the amateur level, coaching an amateur club, but we had a mix of players, at first team level. We'd had a mix that had played before, and then we had loads that were just completely new to the game. Now, it's not that you don't have that in the men's game. You do have that as well. But like you say, sort of grown up in those environments, they've seen it, even if they've not sort of played for a team, they'll have played football at school or whatever, they'd have had more
Yeah.
opportunities. That was a massive thing I noticed. And even things like not understanding what like training is and what sort of training sessions look like and thing, that was what I found. And I think you're so right. People think it's because the women's tag gets thrown around, which is just ridiculous. It's not. It's because they've not had the same opportunity or upbringing like you're saying now.
Yeah.
So I find that fascinating. I mean, I really do. And I suppose, you know, that sort of playing in the boys' game, I guess, you know, we said that was the norm. So, you know, were you ever treated differently from the coaching or anything like that? That always fascinates me as well, because I've seen it myself where we've had, not me, but working in certain coaching contexts where we've had like a girl come and the coach will treat that girl differently. And again, I just think that's ridiculous. You see them as players.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Sorry, no, I think my laptop is freezing. I don't think my internet's very good, so I keep cutting you off. I'm sorry.
It's okay.
So when I played for Edmonton Boys, I had kind of the first main manager, and there was an assistant manager as well. And the main manager was the loveliest guy. I mean, he was really supportive of me, loved me as a player, and really helped me develop my game. But the way I was treated with him was very different to the way the assistant manager treated me. I mean, the guy that I really liked said to me, you know, when I had to leave, he said, you know, when you play for England one day, give me a call. And that's one thing I still want to achieve, and be able to give him that call one day. But I'd still like to speak to him now, or bump into him and say, look where I've got. I've got to where I said I would. So yeah, he was always lovely.
I don't know what it was, but it was noticeable. And I remember watching my dad have a conversation with him and stuff, because they had conflicting ideas of what I should do on the pitch and things. I remember my dad saying, she's a kid playing in the boys team, it doesn't make a difference. But so I did have conflicting feelings towards two different managers. But again, as a kid, you're resilient, and I thought, oh well, at the time, and now I think it's just really not very good. I mean, I've even had friends that have said, when they've joined boys teams and stuff, it's like you know, they've told the boys you can't score until you pass away 3 times and stuff like that. I never experienced that, but I thought, like, that actually happens. And I thought that is just baffling.
Grateful.
And you know, even when I got to secondary school, the teachers, I mean, I remember even in GCSE I took PE, and one of the subjects, there was 2 girls in my year that played football, me and another girl, she was very good, and we both took the football part of the sports GCSE, and obviously there was like 25 boys and us 2 girls, and the coach was just so outright sexist about it and stuff, you know, we bought you shin pads, you know, that kind of thing, and we got rated higher than every boy, and to be fair to him, at the end he was like, you are the best 2 players here, which was a nice thing to hear. But for weeks it had been, you know, like a the pre-idea that you're not going to be as good, you know, do you really need the separate changing room? Well, yes, that kind of thing. And it just wasn't a thing, because we didn't even have a girls' secondary school team past year 7, and I loved it. But there wasn't enough interest. And you know, it just really shows the difference nowadays. And I'm looking at my old school and thinking, they're winning all these tournaments and stuff, and I just didn't get the opportunity past year 7. So it's nice to see that it's changed, but it's awful that, you know, even a few years ago it was like that.
Yeah. I mean, yeah, you know, it is. So you sort of hear things like that and you just think, really, you know, was that not common? But you know, like you say, it was what it was, and it's changed now. And you know, I suppose, you know, you now as a professional footballer, those experiences probably benefited, you know, like taking criticism and hearing in the professional game now. So yeah, I mean, what always really fascinates me, Beth, is that, you know, we know it sort of playing. Sorry, when you're a young female player and you're playing in junior football or academy football or whatever, at some point you do have to transition through if you're playing for an all boys team. And, you know, I don't think it happens as much now because there's more opportunity for girls. I certainly know there's a lot in my area now of Sheffield. But what was that like? And I know we briefly spoke, but in terms of, you know, like the game, the environment, I suppose how you were coached, what were the similarities and differences there? I'd be really fascinated to hear.
I don't remember at that age thinking or noticing too much of a difference in the coaching. I'm very big on it's the same job no matter what gender. However, the environment itself, I think, did change because it is an entirely different gender, and you do go through things that other girls do that boys just don't understand because they don't go through it. So there was a change, and it was nice to feel like, although I felt like part of it with the boys, you don't feel entirely because you just aren't the same.
Yeah.
And so going to the girls team and stuff, no matter what level that was, I just really enjoyed being there because there was like-minded females like myself.
So at one point, we did get the opportunity to have a couple of older players down when I played for the West Britcher girls team. To be honest, it was probably one of the only times I got the opportunity as a child. So it was actually really exciting to see an older player. There was two of them actually that played, and sort of have someone to look up to as a little girl playing football.
Visibility it does for young girls, and seeing people that have grown up playing, which that helped too, because obviously there was no girls or women in coaching for boys football, and I've still not actually seen that yet. So there was a change for sure.
Yeah, fascinating. So sort of playing in the boys game when you were younger, did you think that changed how you played when you entered the women's game? And I know this was a youngster, so whether that was noticeable, I don't know, but I'd be really interested to ask anyway. Did you think it made you a different player? Do you think it maybe made you a better player? Were you stronger in some areas but not in others? Do you know what I mean? Because there's often labelled, isn't it, that because of the physical demands, the psychological demands as such, it sometimes is a bit slightly different in the changes. So, did you think that might have benefited your game in any way?
I think when I got to women's football, I think it was so long ago I played for the boys that there wasn't much effect from that period of time.
I don't think much prepares you for the difference in senior football, whether that be from boys to men's or girls to women's, because it is just so different.
But I think initially going into the girls' game, like I said before, I think you're right in saying the physicality was probably very good for me. I have many friends in the girls' team that watched it as frequently as boys. I did some, but so boys have been more exposed to seeing how men challenge. So I did fit into that quite well. I went up to the girls' team. That I could see a difference in that because they'd never been taught that. They'd never been, it was basics are taught, but 3 years later. So while it was brilliant and stuff, that was the noticeable difference, I think. Like you said, not because they were boys, but because they had more exposure to it. So that's what I'd say.
Yeah, I mean that's fascinating because the senior version of the women's game is crazy physical, but and I don't know if this is, I think this is again often labelled that because it's girls playing and girls are nice and girls don't want to fight each other and all that stupid stuff that's tagged around, and boys are more likely to fight. That and I sometimes see this as well with coaches, that sometimes when I see them sort of coaching girls, they're more likely to like stop if someone's doing a shoulder barge or something like that, particularly when it's like under 11s, under 12s, whatever. And I just again think, but they're playing football. But that really fascinates me because the senior game is really physical. But even now, I see a lot of junior games in women's football, and it's not always as sort of, the sort of things you pick up, I guess, like what you're saying in the boys' game. So, I suppose for some of your peers that you might have seen that maybe just played in the women's game, was that a hard transition from them? But for you, it was kind of just the norm?
Yeah, I mean, I've always been big on train the way that you play.
To be honest, ironically, although I did gain a lot of physicality from playing boys football, and I could translate that onto the pitch in girls football, as I got older, physicality in the women's game was something I actually had to work on quite a lot.
So it kind of just backs up that the physicality from a child didn't translate into it as a woman. But now I've really worked on that, and I always go out to impress and train the way you play. And even in Bulgaria, it wasn't like that. Whereas I left the National League side, Burton Albion, and it was very much train as you play. And I went over there and it wasn't at all. And it was literally like no injuries, not much contact, that kind of thing.
You're right. I mean, I think one thing I've definitely noticed, either watching coaches coach or kind of being around them or something, is kind of the willingness for coaches to stop and start and pause training sessions or little games when there's been a bit of a bump or, like a shoulder barge and stuff, which isn't quite the same when it translates across to the same age in boys football. And I don't know if it's kind of the internalised sort of idea that girls might not want to be bumped as hard or kind of more as physical as boys, but it doesn't really make sense because as you grow older, that's all the women's game is, equally as rough.
It actually takes a lot to get a red card in a women's game. So I've seen some horrendous injuries, more so than boys football when I watch. So yeah, I think some people I know did the transition to playing like that in training and stuff because they'd always been taught by coaches to be that little bit softer in training and stuff. So it did make a difference when they came to the pitch. And I know some very good players growing up that were just really shy going into challenges, and I just thought, it's because you've been taught that way. Yeah. So there is massively a difference, even if it's not a conscious one, with the way girls are taught compared to boys.
Yeah, 100%. I've had a lot of conversation. I've obviously transitioned from the men's game, being a male myself, and I had a lot of conversation when I first transitioned, and people would say, it's not as physical, so you don't need to teach them as much physicality, or it's not as quick, so you don't have to work on sprinting or things like that. But to me, it's the same game of football. Why wouldn't you? It might look differently, obviously the demands are different. We know that. You might say the tactical demands are different, but everything else is exactly the same. So why would you say things like, oh, because it's stuff like that not growing up in the women's game, I'd have never understood that. But sort of being very involved in it now, and I hear things like that, and it really, because it's like, they're just players.
Yeah.
The gender thing.
That's one thing.
Go on.
Yeah, it's one thing I'd mention is that what people don't and can't grasp or don't want to grasp is that yes, it's a slower game. We accept that. But I can do every skill the same, and it doesn't make a difference because I'm a woman. But people don't understand that our max speed, we are still exerting the same energy and pressure and skill as the man. It's just because it's slower, it's not worse. We're doing the same thing, and that's to my maximum, just like a guy is to their maximum. So, we're working at the same rate. We're not working less hard. We're not, it's slower and maybe less physical, but it's still at the height of my demands. So, people struggle to really actually grasp that, or they don't want to. I think that's the point to make. But I get a lot of comments on Twitter and things. People just don't like that I play football. Men, just some guys, they just don't like that girls play football. It's absolutely bizarre, but
ridiculous. But yeah, I suppose that's just a culture. But I think we're certainly changing that now, aren't we? So that's fantastic.
Oh, yeah.
So yeah, I think this leads us on very nicely to our second segment, or should I say third segment on the podcast today. So, spoken about coming up in sort of playing in all boys teams, the tradition to the women's game. But what really also, I just find fascinating about the women's game is that there is obviously a lot of female coaches, not enough in my opinion, and there's a lot of male coaches in the women's game. But yet in the men's game, you might see one or two female coaches at grassroots. I have, but at the senior levels, the top levels, you rarely see that. So, I suppose coming up throughout your career, have you had lots of experiences of having male coaches and female coaches? It being more one or the other? I'd be really interested to hear your journey through that.
So for every team that I've played for, the main coach has always been a man. I haven't had as many experiences with female coaches as men, which falls in line with most clubs and most managers nowadays anyway, although it's changing. I have had some experiences with some amazing female coaches, though. An example would be when I was about 17, I got the opportunity to trial for Spurs when I think Karen Hills is the name, was manager of Spurs Women. and I went to trial for the first team, and very, very tough experience, but an amazing one. It was an all-day thing, and that was kind of my first proper taster of professional elite female coach, which I actually really, really enjoyed. And I think the difference is that there's a sense of kind of relatability there. She understands more what it's like to be female in the world and in sport, and I think that's what I took away from it the most. Like, it was a difference, and I felt sort of proud. Like it was a really nice thing.
Yeah.
Like you're doing something I'd love to do. This is something I've not really seen, and like I was just thriving in the environment. It was really nice to see. And I've had, a couple of development team coaches that have been women and stuff, but they've never been mine. So I've had more male coaches than female, but definitely loved having female as much as the men. There's, but I mean, one thing I will say is, throughout lockdown, I've been doing a few Q&As on Zoom with some younger teams, which has been really nice. And even the male managers, one notably said to me, thank you so much for doing that, because they will have got more out of an hour and a half of you than they have all season. And I thought that was really a nice way to sort of sum it up. Female to female, the same as male to male, you do have more of relatability. So that's one thing I'll put my finger on. I have, in my experience, had more male than female coaches.
Yeah.
Which is like most people my age, to be honest.
Yeah. No, I mean, that word relatedness is really interesting. I mean, that's a concept of motivation. So if you feel related, or the more you feel related to someone, you're more likely to be motivated. So if it's your manager, if you feel more related to them, you're more likely to feel motivated to perform for them or play for them. So that's really interesting. So, in your experiences, if it's, so when you've played and it's been a male manager, has that been a male backroom staff, or has it included females as well? That'd be interesting for me to find out.
At Burton, we had a lot of backroom staff that were women, which was nice. And as far as I can remember, all my other teams have been solely men, to be honest. At Notts County, we did have a development team manager that was a woman for a while. And, people were working behind the scenes. So I think, which actually I've not thought about it before. I mean, my last two clubs have been really good for that, whereas before, which highlights the difference actually. I mean, even in Pirin in Bulgaria, our assistant manager was a woman, and she was actually on the team as well. She could play if she wanted to, which is actually interesting. How it's like a worldwide thing now. I actually experienced more equality in Bulgaria, in a small little classic town in Bulgaria, than I have in every club in England, which is very interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean that's fascinating, because when I first stepped into the women's game, it was me and my younger brother, who was also a coach, who was the assistant manager, and I was always very conscious of that. I was always very conscious that, I mean, I've always been quite an open person, and I'm always one to say to my players, look, if you ever need anything, please come and see me, please let me know, please drop us a phone call. And, players would certainly do that. But when we then bought a assistant coach who was a female herself, we found that they would then go in any other problems that they probably didn't think that we'd understand. So things like the menstrual cycle, for example, that initially as males, you're aware of what it is, but you don't actually have too much information of how that might affect the player. They would go to that coach. And so, when I went into Oakley Town, something that was really big on my mind was, if we're going to have a male manager and a male assistant manager, we need to make sure we've got 3 or 4 coaches that are females.
Yeah.
That relatedness as well. And I, from what I've been told and what I'm hearing at the minute, that certainly helped in terms of those lines of communication. And if some of those youngsters are having problems, they feel more comfortable at times to go female. So, would that be fair to say from some of your experiences as well, that might be yourself or your teammates?
Yeah, I think it's definitely true. I mean, recently I actually watched, I don't know if you saw it, there was, I think potentially BBC did like a string of documentaries on like Rebecca Adlington and Judy Murray and people in sport, and Rebecca Adlington actually focused on it a lot. She had a male coach, and and she was speaking about menstrual cycle and how things do affect things, and how it's sort of still a taboo subject and things like that. So definitely. I mean, it's brilliant that obviously you're in the female team. You talk openly about everything anyway, but it's nice. It is nice to have the female aspect of it. If you have a female coach and stuff, you do feel more comfortable, because it's not, in my experience, it's not from the girls' side feel so much uncomfortable talking to the male coach. Sometimes it's like, how will the male coach perceive that?
Yeah.
And then there's the line of boundary. What does the coach want to hear? And what does, and sometimes, I mean, it shouldn't be that way, but it is.
Yeah.
So, woman to woman, you're always like that. There is no issue, because you just go through the same thing. So I do agree with you. It is, it's a really nice thing to hear about. Coaches like encouraging female coaches alongside and stuff. It's a nice thing.
Yeah. I mean, I think it again goes back to that, concept of relatedness. Sorry, and that's fascinating. Sometimes I probably think, well, why don't they just come up and talk to me if I've ever been in this situation? And I have once or twice, but that's really interesting. Well, what are they going to say? And I think particularly things like with the menstrual cycle, for example, that's just one that comes to mind, because it's a male coach who doesn't go through that. Then maybe there's that. Oh, well, what are they going to say then? Do they know what's going on here? And for me personally, I've studied it, learned, because I felt that was important for the role. But I also know a lot of male coaches that haven't even thought about that.
Yeah, it's
and
not.
that's probably that bit of not so much that it's a problem, but I think when we're thinking about coaching implications, and I speak to a lot of male coaches involved in the women's game, I think that's something that really needs to be considered.
Yeah,
that aspect of relatedness, and surely as well. If I mean, again, I'll ask you if there's been some female coaches in the background or backroom staff. Oh, lost you there.
Oh,
back. Oh, you're there. I don't know what happened there. Just disappeared.
how bizarre.
Where did I get to? I'm gonna have to start writing down. Sorry.
It's okay.
So when you were playing for teams that had backroom staff with female coaches or just female backroom staff, would you then, reflecting on that now, did you feel more comfortable in that environment, or was it more just if you knew that you might have had a problem that you needed to talk to someone, you might have felt a bit more comfortable then? Do you know what I mean? Would that make a difference?
I think it does, but subconsciously. I don't think I haven't actually felt in an all-male environment, for coaching staff wise, I haven't felt uncomfortable. I would just probably subconsciously keep things more to myself, which can be argued is a problem. It's better to be more open and stuff. That being said, I have always had, majority of the time, male coaches that were very open and very honest and really would talk to you about anything. But again, like I mentioned before, it is also the choice of the woman on the team and stuff. How will it be responded to? How much do they really know? So is it going to fall on deaf ears? That kind of thing. Not through choice, but because they haven't researched or that kind of thing. But it's one thing I do feel strongly about as well. Like you said, I do feel there should be more taught or more exposure to it. I just think half the population goes through something, the other half doesn't, and it's just, I think it's owe it to the other half to understand more, because we live alongside each other and things. And I think it's a big issue in sport. I mean, particularly for coaches understanding injuries. I mean, whole ACL problems, and now as being links. And I've read studies and things about the link between the cycle and that. And, Chelsea women are now, and England women are now, training around them. And it's really interesting. And I just think it's definitely beneficial to know more about. Yeah.
I mean, 100%, because again, and I'm sure my coach won't mind me saying it, a lass called Georgia, who's our positional coach, she actually did a CPD workshop about what you were just saying there. And it was also linked with her experiences. She's had an ACL herself that she's going through.
Yeah.
And that is so beneficial to me, because again, you're constantly trying to learn, learn as much as you can about what you need to know about your players and all that sort of thing, as a coach should. But there's still little things like that I never actually realised that. Thought about that, and that is, again, I know we're going to talk about this in the next segment, but for me that is so important for a coach, and I think a lot of male coaches probably don't realise that. I mean, I do it myself at times. acting like you would with males. And sometimes you've got to recognise that no, there might be something else going on here that you.
Yeah.
And I think that sort of demonstrates the importance of, for me, certainly having female coaches on the backroom staff has really helped me in that regard. So yeah, fascinating. So I suppose, and it's a bit of a difficult question to ask you because you've said you've had more male coaches than you have female coaches in terms of the head coach and everything. But is there a preference? Does that, is that a thing? Is it player to player? Do players prefer a female coach at the top because that's kind of, I guess like the role model. So you were saying, Karen at Spurs, that was amazing for you, but maybe that, even though it's still amazing when you're having male coaches at the top, but that was someone to look to, thinking, wow, look what she's doing. Is that a difference? I mean, I'd be fascinated to hear, your thoughts on that.
To be honest, I wouldn't say I have a preference. In my opinion, for what I've gone through, I wouldn't say it would be fair to do that, a judgment, because I mean, like, there's been lots of talk recently with Emma Hayes being linked to the AFC women's job, that kind of thing. I'm very big on kind of success is not defined by gender.
Yeah.
I think it's the same job. I think you have to have the same skills, teach the same tactics, stuff like that. So I personally don't have a preference because, I mean, without the guys that have coached me, I wouldn't be where I am. So I owe it to them, but I also owe it to the women role models as well, that they've guided me more so in the sense of a role model. So you're right in that. One thing I would say is I'd love to see more women, and I'd love to have a female coach, and there will be differences, and I appreciate the differences, but I probably wouldn't say, I want a woman coach it, because I don't think a man can't deliver something,
Yeah.
I mean, it might vary from player to player, but again, I couldn't think of anyone off the top of my head that would probably say I want a female coach or I want a male. I don't think it matters too much as long as they're a good coach. So.
Oh.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, really. But I think now are going to be the next wave of female coaches, which I'm really excited about. So I think eventually it will be more of a balance, kind of, I've had both equal amounts, which is a nice thought, actually. So
yeah, it certainly is, and I think that's the thing, isn't it? People, I guess forget it's the cultural, isn't it? That the men's game came first, the women's game, came a lot after, and it's took massive strides. And I suppose that's why it's more of a male-dominated industry on the coaching front. It's certainly something I've explored, but I think, like you say, that is certainly changing now. I know there's a load of female coaches I know that are involved in the women's game and doing a great job. So, yeah, I mean, it's really interesting. I actually read a study around that, and I actually had a lass called Taylor Wilkinson who's involved in netball. She came on the podcast 2 seasons back, and she was talking about her sort of research into this women coaching, and it's interesting because a lot of players generally don't even think about it. They don't. Yeah. Sort of have, like you say, subconsciously, because to them it's just the norm.
Yeah.
It's just come up with, it's just the experiences, and if they had experienced all female coaches coming through, then they might have a particular say. But yeah, I mean, I think it's fascinating, and what always frustrates me in a way is, as you think about business, there's always females at the top, chairman, CEOs, whatever, but yet in football, the males game, we still seem to be struggling.
Yeah.
And I think it was 2014. It was the manager of the French national women's team now, and I completely forget the name. Corianne, I think her name is. But she went into Clermont Foot, and I thought then, fantastic, finally, because I exactly the same as you. It's a role. It doesn't matter, where you're from and all that sort of malarkey that comes with it. But it never seemed to kick on from that. And I know we see it in other sports. But I just think I can't wait for that day. So yeah, fantastic, Beth. I think this very nicely then leads us on to our final segment. So we always finish on this podcast implications of coaching practice. So I get obviously a lot of coaches listening to this. I think it's important for them to hear a player's insight in terms of what are things that they should bear in mind. So and I suppose a few points we've gone over already. But why is it important, firstly, to be aware of who you're coaching? So we've spoken there about male coaches and players might not feel as relating this. So for the male coach in the women's game, why is it important for them to recognise that, to maybe recognise why they need to go and learn more about the menstrual cycle, for example, or maybe have a couple of female coaches on board? You know, is that important for you?
Yeah, very to me. I think, like you said, it might not be something through no fault of their own. It's the society that they've even thought about. But one way that I always like to think that changes people's minds a little bit is like think of the benefit you would get as a coach from it. Your players are more likely to trust you, to open up. There's a better understanding, because I mean there is a general consensus of understanding among girls compared to boys in life anyway, that because we go through such different things, that you know, some of them haven't got a clue, and it's like, how far does that translate into coaching as men? Because men of the same age don't have a clue or don't like speaking about it, whereas it's really part of the job. I mean, I saw something recently and it's just really true. I mean, as women, we're expected to go through normal life and not change the way we behave or act, but things go on in the background that we have to suppress or ignore. And it's nice to be in an environment where it's sort of spoken about, or there's a level of understanding, even if it doesn't have to be spoken about a lot. So yeah, I'd say it's very important, because there are things people go through. I mean, the same with you know, mental health and stuff. You could be a men's manager running a boys team, and it's you know, it's exactly the same thing. A boy could be not speaking about something he feels. I mean, there are, you know, with menstrual cycle, there's, you know, some things girls go through and that can link to anxiety and depression and things like that. And it's a mental health spin on it as well. And the way that you'd want to understand the boy that plays for your team, you know, it makes sense to understand the girls that do as well. And it does, it brings you closer, as on like a friendship level as well. There needs to be a level of that as you grow older into the female game. So
yeah, 100%. 100%. I think you're so right. You know, I know we've mentioned the menstrual cycle a lot, but other areas as well.
Yeah,
there seems to be a stigma within that, and a lot of male coaches often don't like talking about that. And I completely agree with you there. I think if you're, you know, one, that's part of the role, so you need to understand that. Two, you need to be open about it, because, you know, you're primarily, a part of your role is being there for your players and caring for your players. But three, I think you're so right. If the coach is open to that, and even maybe holds their hand up, and I think that's a lot of it with male coaches, probably the fear of, well, I don't want to say something because I've not gone through this and I'm not quite sure what this means and all that. But actually, if you're open and you make that environment where it's open to talk about that and all this sort of thing, then, like you said, the players are surely more respectful of that and actually are more appreciative, and then surely that links in more with the coach-athlete relationship, would you say?
Yeah. And I think it enables the player to flourish that bit more. You know, I've had games where, I mean, I struggle terribly with pain and stuff, and where my manager hasn't got a clue, and it's an environment where I've decided not to, and other players have decided not to speak about it because it's either just not going to be beneficial. We know the guy well enough to know that it's just not on the cards. Whereas probably if it was a woman or a guy that I know is quite up on the topic, I would be like, this is happening, and I'm struggling. But I mean, one thing that I've always like, I love the thought of every girls and women's team, maybe from a certain age or something, having the ability or the accessibility to go on some sort of course, or a woman to come in and sort of deliver some sort of course about it. So even if the guy, because you mentioned, and it's a very valid point, that a man might not feel it's his place to bring that up, and might not be comfortable, and that's fair enough, but it might be easier for someone else to open that topic up. And it'd be nice to learn about that from a younger age as well, and maybe, because it's a big thing in women's sport, so that's like a nice thought of something to happen as well eventually, to have accessibility to courses and things to teach and open the conversation. So yeah, I thought it was an interesting point to mention.
Yeah, I 100% agree with you. And you know, that's what's often dominated with the you know, coaching courses, CPD events, because the men's game is bigger traditionally. Everything's always dominated by the men's game. So you know, when you go on a coaching course, if you're, you know, a female or a male, there's never the question of, are you in the men's or the women's? And really, then it should be, oh, you're in the women's, so this is what you need to know. You're in the men's, this is and it's treated as the same, and it is the same sport, but there are differences that like you say, that are really important to consider. So for me, that is such an important message, that people are aware of that. And at the end of the day, I'd hate to think, like you were saying there, you're maybe going through an injury, but you don't want to discuss it with a coach. For me, that's the coach needs to be more supportive there then, and let you know, okay, I don't know, I've not been there myself, I've not gone through that, and maybe we don't have that relatedness there, but still, we need to be open and give you and let you feel comfortable enough to do that. So I think that's another important message as well. And I suppose the final question would be just being aware of players' backgrounds. I think, and I know we've only briefly discussed that, but I think sometimes, and I think it's changing now, but I think traditionally in coaching, coaches would kind of just treat the team as the team and never really look at the individual. So, for you, I suppose, again, from a player's perspective, how important is it that coach is aware of individual players and sort of their background, where they've come from, whether that's in the men's or women's game, in terms of where they've played in the youth, or just in general?
I think that's really important as well. I think it's important to acknowledge in life, again, but it is important in football to understand that backgrounds-wise, let's say, just as an example, I used to have a player that had to arrive to training from an hour away on a bus every day, because they either can't afford a car, or the parents are at work, or they've been home alone all day, and it's difficult, and that kind of ties in with kind of, I don't want to use the word punishment, but I can't think of the word, fines if late to training, fines for this and that and the other. And whilst I do think there needs to be, rules set out for each club, I think it's important. There does need to be a level of understanding about backgrounds, and also, again, that opens up the conversation that maybe if a player is struggling mental health, money-wise, relationships, family, that someone's open enough to say, I'm going through this. This is why I'm not on form, or this is why I'm not at training today. Because I have had those experiences where players have been treated the same when it really shouldn't have been that, or players have been treated differently when, it's getting the fine line between treating people equally, but understanding the difference in people. And I think that needs to be carried out in life as well, because people, personalities are different. You introvert, you extrovert. People go through stuff that they carry that you don't know about. So definitely, I think being a good coach comes from being a good person.
Yeah.
And I find the best people that I've known as coaches are just the most likable people. I mean, someone I'll say recently, I think you know him, you had him on recently, Rich Allen.
Yeah.
Coaching, so I do coaching with him and Jonas from that. And they're classic examples of just good people that are very good coaches. And I know I can speak to them and drop them a message about anything. And I think that's like a really good example of how people and coaches should be. And I'm thankful to have had that with most coaches, but there are some that stick out, and I think, I'm not a coach myself, but you can work on this, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So yeah, I thought it was an important point to mention.
Yeah, 100% agree. And I think that's that traditional approach, isn't it, of one size fits all, where you're so right. You actually have to bear in mind, I've been guilty of it myself, Beth, where, well, why is she late? She's been late 3 times in a row now. Kicking off here. But then you have to step back and go, oh, actually, no, let me communicate first before I do a bit of a telling off or whatever in front of the team. Or anything. Let me find out if there's something. And that's certainly something I've learned. And I think that's such an important message. Yeah, I 100% agree with that. And I think that's something that coaches are beginning to learn and understand. I think, for me, there's a lot of coaches that don't make it to the level, so they don't quite understand that it's the little things like that mean so much, to like what you're saying there, and so much to you personally, to make you feel comfortable. So yeah, fantastic. I've got to say, I've really enjoyed this episode today, Beth. I don't know if there's anything else you want to just add, any messages that for the listeners that might just be important to add. Don't worry if there's nothing else.
I think we've covered everything I wanted to say, to be honest. If I think of something in the next minute, I'll pop it in. But I think we've covered everything I wanted to say. It's been really good, actually, speaking on here. So
no, it's been a pleasure to have you on. I mean, I have to say it's been a fascinating insight for me personally. I'm sure it will be as well for a lot of the listeners. And I think we've covered some really, really important topics there. Things like recognising relatedness, recognizing their backgrounds, recognizing, you know, that sometimes that there could be some stumbling blocks and how we have to, you know, come over them. So yeah, I mean for me it's been absolutely fascinating, Beth. So, you know, for people listening to this podcast today, if they want to, you know, follow you, check out what you're doing on social media, maybe even get in touch and ask you some questions, you know, what would be the best way to find you on social media?
I am under the same @ actually on both Instagram and Twitter. And I think you've actually tweeted me very recently, haven't you? So that's the easiest way to find that. And I'm very vocal on social media and things actually about football. I really enjoy. I like championing equality, and I update my progress quite a lot. And I have a lot of people, even mums and dads of children I've coached before, that say like, I follow you all the time. I follow what you're doing. So, you know, I really welcome people that are interested in my journey, and likewise, I'm always interested in any questions or talking to other people. It's one of my favourite things to do. So, yeah, absolutely.
Love that. Well, I'll share that on our website when we put this podcast out. But Beth, it just leaves me to say thank you so much for agreeing to come on. It's been great to connect, great to chat to you and hear your experiences. And once again, thank you to everyone who's checked out the podcast today, whether it's your first time listening or you've been a fan for the podcast over the last 8 months or so. If you like the podcast, please do leave us a review on any of our platforms. You can check us out on YouTube now with our new YouTube channel. But yeah, Beth, thank you so much to you. Thank you so much to all our listeners, and we will see you all next week. Next week.
Thank you.